So welcome everyone, good evening. Welcome to the public lecture held by the lecturers of the second Dubrovnik Summer School of Theology. The topic we have this year is Apolitical Faith, the Christian in Political Arena. As the Apostolic Administrator of Dubrovnik Diocese and Coadjutor Archbishop of Rijeka Mate Uzinić emphasized in his invitation to the students, this topic has been chosen because it is evident that we are witnessing continuous misuses of faith and religion for political goals, just as we have misuses of politics for religious causes. In our region, where there is a constant intertwining of religious, political, and national, we are obliged to discern about these topics in order to build a more just, open, and human society. The lecturers invited this year have all, in their academic work or in practice, dealt with politics. And we are delighted to have them with us tonight in order to speak about it and about the relation between politics and faith. Let me present them to you. Ladies first, so let me start by presenting to you Sister Teresa Forcades. Welcome to Dubrovnik.
Thank you.
She is from Spain, a physician, theologian, and Benedictine nun. After studying medicine, she specialized in internal medicine and holds a doctorate in public health. In 1997, she entered the Benedictine monastery of Santa Maria de Montserrat in Spain. She studied theology at Harvard and in her native Catalonia, where in 2009 she earned a doctorate in theology. We are also honored to have among us Professor Tomáš Halik from Czech Republic, Professor of Sociology at Charles University in Prague, President of the Czech Christian Academy, Catholic priest, and pastor of the academic parish in Prague. He is the recipient of the Templeton Award and holds a honorary doctorate from Oxford University. Once, he was a member of the so-called underground church in the Czech Republic. Welcome, Professor Halik. Also, we are very glad to have with us an Orthodox theologian, so Professor Aristotle Papanicolaou from the USA. He is a professor of theology at Fordham University in New York, where he also holds the Archbishop Demetrius Chair in Orthodox Theology and Culture, and also he is the co-founding director of the Orthodox Christian Studies Center. Welcome. And finally, it is also a great pleasure to welcome here tonight Professor Ivan Šarčević from Bosnia and Herzegovina. I guess that he is the one that our public maybe knows the best. He is a Franciscan and a professor at the Franciscan Theology in Sarajevo. Welcome. Dobro večer. Dobrodošli. Okay, so we will start immediately with the questions because we have a lot of questions, and so let me start. We will open with discerning a little bit this idea why we chose this topic, and I would like to start with Professor Šarčević tonight. So you say that Christianity is a prophetic religion that aims to change the world. It demands to engage with the world. So does that mean that faith is inevitably political, or it should be political and not apolitical?
Dobro večer svima, drago mi je naravno biti u ovom gradu.
Good evening to all of you.
Okay.
Good evening to all of you, and I'm glad that I'm in this city.
U gradu susretišta mediteranske kulture koja je vjerojatno što po turizmom, što ovim srednjoevropskim okretanjem ekonomskim pitanjima zaboravljen kao prostor susretišta kultura i religija.
In this city that represents basically an encounter of many cultures that were in the past, and today, due to the tourism and also economic problems of the Middle Europe, is basically forgotten. Its character is basically forgotten as a city of encounter of cultures and many religions.
I zato je meni drago da sam pozvan ovdje i da budem u društvu ovih dobrih ljudi. Prije svega bih rekao ljudi koji nastoje, naravno, kao teolozi reflektirati svoju vjeru, razumski je opravdati.
And therefore I'm glad to be also among these people here, the lecturers, the panelists today, who are before everything good people, but also they want seriously to engage in the questions that they are dealing with, in this sense, with the politics.
Sad što se tiče ovoga teškoga pitanja za kojega bi trebalo potrošili su neki ljudi mnogo vremena.
So regarding this question that is really hard question that many people have spent so much hours, so much days, entire lives
I ne
to
samo
deal with
vremena,
them.
nego i živote neki.
But not only time, but also people's lives were spent to deal with these questions.
Najlakše bi kazao da je vjera bitno politična, ali ne za vlastiti interes, nego za zajedničko dobro. Dakle, da nije apolitična, to bi značilo nešto paralelno, kao da je amoralna, a pogotovo nije antipolitična.
So therefore I would like to say on the basic level that yes, the religion, faith is political, but not in the sense of pursuing one's own interests, but for the common good. So if it's apolitical, it's similar to say that it's amoral.
A nije nikako antipolitična.
And it's not anti-political, certainly.
Jednostavnije možda za sve nas, a možda je jednostavno, mi u biti stručnjaci dijele sve naše svjetske velike religije na mistične i proročke.
The experts are dividing in the sense all world religions and mystical religions and prophetic religions.
Naravno, to ne znači da su proročke religije u koje ubrajamo židovstvo, kršćanstvo, islam bez mistike.
That doesn't mean that prophetic religions in which are monotheistic religions of Islam, Christianity and Judaism are not mystical religions.
Jedna od osnovnih stvari kod proročkih religija jest da čovjeku je darovana vjera, Bog ima inicijativu, čovjek svojim doumljivanjem ne može doći do Boga.
One of the main characteristics of prophetic religions is that the initiatives is on the side of God, and the human being cannot discern and come to God through his intellectual abilities.
I u tome smislu Bog šalje svoje ljude, što se kaže, svoje proroke. U nekim religijama se ne voli danas govoriti o tome, nego se govori recimo o islamu. U našem islamu, u ovom ovdje, redovito se govori ne govori se toliko o prorocima, koliko o vjerovjesnicima ili poslanicima.
And therefore, the God is sending his own people, prophets, and it's very rare today to speak about the prophets. For instance, in our Islam here, they don't speak about the prophets, but they are speaking about those who are sent, poslanici. I don't know how to translate it correctly.
Poslanici i vjerovjesnici, oni koji donose vjeru.
And those who are bringing faith.
Sada se samo skraćeno vratimo na naše proročke religije.
To return shortly on our prophetic religions.
One nisu vjere za samousavršavanje.
Those are not faith for self-perfection.
U tim religijama kad Bog zove ljude, on zove redovito grešnike.
In those religions, when God is inviting people, he is inviting basically sinners.
I ne zove ih da kažu povuci se iz svijeta i usavrši se da postaneš savršen čovjek u smislu da te, ne obezvređujući budizam, recimo da te muke i nevolje svijeta ne dodiruju.
And he is not inviting them to withdraw from the world to become perfect, and in that sense perfectness would be a condition to zadnji dio rečenice
da te muke
Aha,
nevolje
so that the
svijeta
sufferings and of the world don't touch you,
ili grijehi svijeta
or
ili
the
drugi
sins
ljudi
or other people,
ili opakost ili grešnost
or
drugih
evilness
ljudi.
or sinfulness of other people don't touch you.
Bog u proročkim religijama šalje ljude da mijenjaju svijet, da mijenjaju društvo.
In prophetic religions, God is sending people to change the world, to change society.
Sad tu ima u pojedinoj našoj svakoj religiji razlike, židovstvo, islam, kršćanstvo u odnosu prema svijetu i prema društvu.
And in our religions, Judaism, Islam and Christianity, there are differences towards in relationship towards the world.
Naravno, svi ćemo mi sebe mjeriti prema svojim idealima, a nikada prema svojoj praksi.
Of course, we will measure ourselves according to our ideals and not according to our practice.
I ono što bi kazao još jest da ono što je specifično za Isusa Krista, dakle za kršćanstvo,
And what is specific for Jesus Christ, for Christianity,
i utoliko se može govoriti da on nije apolitičan, a niti stranački
and
političan,
in that sense we can say that he is not apolitical and
Nije
partisanly political.
nego ono što su govorili teolozi, on unosi krizu u svijet.
But what theologians were saying, he brings crisis into the world.
Dakle, on u svijet ne želi uspostaviti nekakav tradicionalni prijašnji etos koji postoji kao što je recimo Mojsije ili kao što je Konfucije.
So his intention is not to bring into the world old traditional ethos in the sense of Moses or Confucius, for instance.
Ovo sve pojednostavljujem.
I'm simplifying everything now, of
S
course.
druge strane, njemu nije nakana da napravi teokratsko društvo.
In the other sense, his intention is not to create, to constitute theocratic
Da ovlada
society,
svijetom.
to rule the world.
Kao što bi mi neki kršćani i katolici željeli da sve ovo budu kršćani.
As we sometimes ask Christians, Catholics would like that everybody should
Ili
be
kako bi
Catholics or
neki-
Christians.
Ili kako bi neki političari europski htjeli napraviti, što se u ovom našem prostoru poznata riječ, što smo govorili mi ovih dana iz Turskog što dolazi, da naprave jedan kršćanluk, societas kristijana, ali moderni, dakle jednu kršćansku kulturu, gotovo bez vjere, koja je, dakle,
Or what our politicians, our European politicians are not all of them, of course, like to say that we would like to create societas Christiana or Christian culture without faith.
evo i tu je negdje ta razlika i zašto kršćani trebaju ući u politički prostor, svećenici, odmah uzimam ne stranački, ali politika je bitno, što bi rekao predsjednik Havel, pokojni, politika je bitno častan posao, osobito kad ga vode časni ljudi. Ja ne znam da li poslije teologije ima časniji posao od politike.
So the Christians in those differences are invited to enter the world, because as the late President Havel would say that the politics is honorable calling, honorable job.
I završio bi, nije jednostavno ući u svijet politike, u društvo. Mnogi ljudi bježe.
It's not simple to enter the world of politics or the society. Many people are escaping it.
Bježe od svijeta, traže svoje duhovne oaze.
They are running away from the world, try to find their spiritual oasis.
Traže svoje, što bismo mi u kršćanstvu kazali, svoje tabore gdje će biti sami sa svojim gospodinom, jer ni njega kao ni njih niko ne razumije.
And they are usually trying to find the places where they will be alone with their own Lord, because as they would like to say, nobody understands them or even God.
Drugi opet žele uspostaviti teokratsko društvo i biti fanatični i boriti se protiv svijeta jer smatraju oni imaju rješenje za ovaj svijet i to brzi, nasilni put.
On the other side, believers are intended sometimes to rule the world, to create some kind of theocratic society, because they believe that they have solution, they have the truth.
A ako postoji za nas kršćane put, to je put jasnog, sigurnog promjene svijeta, ali kroz nenasilje, vrlo bitno, kroz nenasilje i kroz neprezir prema ljudima. Mislim da živimo u kulturi prezira, to je, kako kaže današnji papa, jedno tako perfidno skriveno nasilje koje danas vlada, to je prezir.
And if we Christians should enter the world, we should enter in the first place with persistent and consistent politics of non-violence, and also the politics of that denounces all the hate. President, it's not hate. It's despise, which Pope Francis calls one of the trickiest, I would say, the politics and attitudes.
I tu leži korijen jako teško ljubiti one koji preziru i koji su neprijatelji. To je završetak jako teško, jednostavno kazano, ali jako teško. Toliko ko bude u ovome svijetu mijenjao svijet na taj proročki način da može pogledati svoga neprijatelja i stati pred njega, bilo kao manjina, bilo kao nekakav marginalac, periferan, taj čovjek je uistinu vjernik.
So if believers are basically called to enter the world and to be able to stand in front those who despise him or those who are the enemies, and if they can stand in front of them and not running away or excluding them, I think that is the way the believers in politics should be.
So, Professor Papanikolaou, I would like to ask you maybe to add to this your Orthodox perspective. So, how do you see this engagement of Orthodox churches with politics, or in Orthodoxy, this engagement of Christians in politics?
Thank you. Well, it depends on whether you're asking me to describe how the institutional churches are functioning now, or whether you're asking me to theologically sort of propose how I think the churches should be acting. So those are two different kinds of responses. In the Orthodox churches today, I've said this and I've wrote this, that I think that for the first time in its history, the Orthodox churches are learning to live without emperors. And it's a complicated history, but of course we have the Christian Roman Empire, which is usually referred to as the Byzantine. We had the Ottomans that were pretty much over most of the Orthodox world, even over some of the Catholic world at some point. Russia was not a part of that, and in the 19th century there was a vibrant intellectual discussion about democracy and democratic structures amongst theologians, amongst philosophers. But then, of course, the 20th century is very complicated, with the rise of various nation states, but then communism, the wars, etc. It's really in the post-communist situation that the Orthodox churches globally together are really confronting what it means to live and to negotiate, I would say, democratic structures. And after the fall of communism, it wasn't very clear what would be the outcome. And since then, we have, I think, a bit of a clearer picture. For the most part, in the Orthodox countries, which is somewhat predictable, you have a kind of relinking, a reconnecting of religious identity and national identity. So, for example, in Russia today, if people are asked whether they are Orthodox, the polls are somewhere in the 80 to 85% that they identify as Orthodox. I mean, this is, if you really think about it, this is a remarkable, I don't know what the next word is, accomplishment, achievement, phenomenon, right? But very, very few people attend the churches. Very, very few. Very similar phenomenons in Romania, although Romania is probably the most active, I think, the most religious of the Orthodox countries, together with Georgia. Very similar situation in Serbia. I think Bulgaria is kind of a different sort of situation. But basically what you have is by having sort of this religion and national identity kind of linked again, you have a kind of the reemergence of the national churches. So one of the great challenges of the Orthodox churches is this religious nationalism, the role of the institutional churches within these particular spaces, while simultaneously they commit themselves to democracy and to democratic structures. And so this is the great challenge that they face because, again, there's not an Orthodox church in the world that is against democracy. I mean, they'll all say, oh yes, of course, we're very democratic. But when it comes to various issues, some of the issues such as really basic religious pluralism, when it comes to basic issues such as basic ethnic pluralism, when it comes to issues such as rights for sexual minorities or issues related to sexuality and gender, it seems that the Orthodox churches are not so committed to democratic liberalism or democratic structures. So there's a bit of this tension, I would say, because it's clear that the Orthodox churches today, the institutional churches, want to maintain their privileges within the society. They worked hard at reestablishing the link between religious and national identity. They want to work hard to preserve their status and their influence within these societies. Even if people don't go, it is still an important, the institutional churches are very important centers of power and influence. They will say that they're supportive of democratic structures, but then when it comes to various issues, it seems that they are not so supportive, and they draw the line at certain places, and they become, again, now promoters of what has been called traditional values. I'll just say one more thing, and then I'll sort of close. In Russia in particular, Russia has taken it to another level, because what Russia has done is that over the past 10 years, the Putin regime has somewhat decided to appropriate the religious history and language and sort of stories and symbols of Russia's past. And they have started to make that a kind of part of their own identity, mission, and they have sort of positioned themselves, the Russian government now has positioned themselves as the defenders of what's called traditional values. And this doesn't work only within Russia, but they position themselves, they've used this traditional values language for geopolitical purposes. So now the East-West divide, there's kind of a new Cold War, which is actually framed not around communism and democracy anymore, but around social values, around traditional values and what others perceive to be, which I think is wrong, but perceived to be a kind of godless, atheist, liberal, amoral, secular West, which is a caricature and a false representation. So to some extent, they have globalized what has been called the culture wars, and they are using it as ways of geopolitically identifying themselves against the West. And so this is now, I think, where we're at to some extent, and because the Russian Orthodox Church is playing a leading role, and there are American evangelicals that are turning to the Russian Orthodox Church to be this world leader, and turning to the Russian government even, to be this world leader of traditional values, because they know that in certain countries within the West, this particular kind of battle politically has been lost. So that's the description, which in my mind sounds a little bleak, a little bit pessimistic. But I like to end optimistically, because I think, as I will speak tomorrow, theologically, that doesn't have to be the way. I'm going to make it more stronger. Theologically, it shouldn't be that way. If you believe in the incarnation, the way that all Orthodox Christians, I think all Christians do, then that's not the way it should go politically. I can elaborate more on that, but I'll just leave it at that for everybody to think about. If you believe in the incarnation, that's not what you should do. And I think that's the kind of message we have to send to the institutional churches. I don't think they'll listen to us. But our hope then could be with at least Christians, Orthodox Christians, other Christians, who believe in the incarnation, to tell them a different kind of message, that it could be a different kind of way, that they don't have to engage in this kind of politics of dominance. So,
Could you elaborate it, though, a little bit, just a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is maybe a common theme, that we have this idea that somehow our mystical, ascetical life, that our life and struggle towards closeness with God is somehow different from our political life. And again, I will speak tomorrow, I don't think that that's correct. If you engage in politics, you have to engage with people that you don't agree with, the people who don't believe what you believe in. So there you see the challenge that we have to deal with the stranger. And of course, God says to our struggle, I mean, in our Orthodox tradition, the word that we use, and it's very much in common with our Catholic tradition, with the Catholic tradition, and many of the Protestant traditions as well, this idea of becoming godlike, deification, theosis. Now that doesn't mean to become Zeus, or to become Thor and to lord it over people. It means to love as God loves. And that's a very difficult thing, because God's love is constant, and no matter how many mistakes we make, no matter what we do, no matter what, God always loves us. So for us to love as God loves is a daunting task. But it includes the stranger and the enemy. And so we have to, the political space, like the monks go in the desert. I write about this, the political space, the political arena, the place where we meet the stranger, and most often the enemy, is like a desert. It's like a desert where we are encountering demons, as St. Anthony did, and we are working to make sure that those demons don't cause us to demonize. And we're working to figure out what are the things that we do so that I can relate to the stranger and to the enemy and to love them as God loves. Of course, that doesn't mean to be what we call a pushover in English. It doesn't mean to just let people kind of walk over you. Of course, you fight for justice, but you always have to fight for justice in a way that you encounter the stranger and the enemy and to love them as God loves them. And that kind of politics is not a politics of religious nationalism. That kind of politics is a politics of pluralism. That kind of politics is a politics that recognizes that a church space is not the same as the political space. That kind of politics is a politics where we try to form patterns of relationship, of respect, of working together, of disagreements, of justice. It's not a politics of privilege and status and force and coercion and bullying and everything associated with religious nationalism, basically. Does that help?
Yes, you opened some topics like nationalism, and I will come back to that. But I wanted to ask something, Sister Teresa, because you did enter the political arena. So I just wanted to ask you something about this experience. You have, in 2015, received the permission from your superior and the Holy See to set aside your habit and entered the political arena by joining the leftist constituent process movement. returning later to your monastery in 2018 and resuming your life as a contemplative nun. So could you share with us your experience in the political life, and also what were the reasons why you did this? Maybe there were also some theological reasons for this choice.
Okay. So first, you said that I was given permission to leave aside my habit. Well, actually, I was forced to do that. I would have never done otherwise. So it means that for me, anything I do, politically or otherwise, I want to do as a sister, right? As a nun. That's who I am. And if I cannot do something as a nun, then I'd rather not do it. But I understood what my sisters were telling me, because not all at the monastery, in the monastery, were in agreement with that. And then some felt uncomfortable, so it was a compromise within the monastery. But it was not that I wanted to be 3 years away, exclaustrated. But this is the formula we have when you go, for example, to take care of your mother or your father, who are old, and you cannot follow the hours of the liturgical community, and then you are allowed that. So one of the old nuns said, okay, Teresa doesn't have her mother sick, but she has her country sick. So that's, you can take that in wrong ways too, but I think you understand what she meant. That so that was one thing. And then you also said to join the constituent process, but actually I had founded that. So that was in 2015, but that I left, or I had the exclaustration. But in 2012, what happened is that I was invited by Convention of Business People in Catalonia. This is the most important convention of business people. They do it in the Pyrenees, and they have their business things for 4 days, and then they ask somebody that usually it's somebody that's well known in the media or has some popularity to give a talk. And I think that's my suspicion. To this day, I don't know how that really went, but my suspicion is that these business people usually externalize services to others. So they ask some kind of media company, or okay, invite somebody for this. I'm not sure if it went like this, but I think it was the case. So they invited me because I was speaking publicly and well known, something. Well, I don't know what they really were thinking, but I thought, oh, I'm being invited to the most important convention of business people. So I think I have to do something like an ethical critique of capitalism. So then I prepared that, and I did an ethical critique of capitalism. And it was like a shock, right? That they were not expecting that. The people that were there were like, it was a shock. And so a few days later, a local newspaper did an interview with me, like a full hour on the same topic, and then a TV program asked me to go to the TV program and repeat those ideas. And then just people started to call me or write me and say, why don't you try to bring that into practice, right? And then I felt caught, right? And it's like, oh no, I only wanted to talk about it. You know? I don't really want to do it. So I felt, what does it mean to bring it into practice? So then some people that belonged to an anti-capitalist, small political party that had no parliamentarian representation, they came and said, okay, we can help and let's do it together. And they had actually the idea we could do the Catalan Syriza, because at that time Syriza was like this hope for many people that they could do politics differently. And I was not interested in doing the Catalan Syriza, but it was also the moment in our country where the independence movement was gaining momentum, and I certainly thought if it comes to have a constituent assembly, that we need to set the rules again, anew, of how we want to live together. Well, that's a real good opportunity to try to influence that process in the way that the poor are placed in the middle of it, right? So bring what you can call the true needs of most of the population to the center, and to really have an opportunity to debate nationwide what that should look like. I thought it was worth it to try to invest time and energy and effort in that. And as whether this has theological reasons, I remember that in this business people convention, I was reading from the book of Job, right? And reading from the book of Jonah, and like they were like that. So that, of course, it comes from what my colleagues have said here. You cannot be true to the gospel and think, people are dying, oh, so sorry. right? But I'm in nirvana, and I don't mean as critique to any Buddhism, but you know what I mean? I have my illumination, I'm in peace, I know God is good, and people die, too bad, but it doesn't concern me. No, I don't think you can be Christian like this. Of course, you have your vocation, and mine is to be in the monastery, so this needs to be also respected. But there are exceptions, right? So I thought, I don't have a political vocation that is stronger than my monastic vocation, but can I do an exception and exceptionally try to contribute to this process to see whether we can really have a constituent assembly? I was in contact with people in Iceland. In Iceland, they had a very beautiful political process. I had been invited in Venezuela for other reasons, liberation theology. I had seen some of the political process also that happened in other countries like Bolivia, and everywhere you have their own problems and circumstances, but I thought it was very important to help that. So in any case, we started that, and then we announced that again on TV, and in, I think it was 3 weeks, we had 40,000 people joining. This is unbelievable. I didn't know at that time. So now in looking back, I think I just did very poorly because I had no experience at all. So I thought 40,000 people is okay. There is not one political party in whole of Spain that has 40,000 people. All political parties knew it, but I didn't know that. So I thought, okay, I had no clue. So then all the political leaders were coming to the monastery, and I'm like, okay, nice to meet you, and what do you want to do? So what I want to say is that it was really, I was fully inexperienced. Some of the people that were around me at that time were very skilled, but they had their own goals, so I was naive at that time. So what happened to me is basically that I was ready to run for office, and then I started going to these meetings that were going to prepare the political campaign, and then I was astounded at what they were saying, how they were doing that, and I thought, we're not going to say one thing to the outside and another thing to the inside, right? And they said, what do you think? Of course we're going to do that. That's the way things go here. So then I just left. That's basically my political involvement. I couldn't participate because of the assumptions that were done in the process of being political representative at that time with these people. I know here in Croatia you have some other people that have started from below, and they have arrived to the city mayor in Zagreb. So I'm not saying this is not possible. It was just that I was, one, too naive myself. I was not trained in politics or anything. And second, that some of the people that were around me at the beginning of it, they had really their own agenda, and I didn't know until the end. So that's the story. But in the process, I could sense for the first time in my life, and I think I'll never forget, what it is, what I've been talking about in our seminar the first day. What is political subjectivation? How it feels when people really start to have hope that what they think and what they need and what they dream about this living together might become reality. This is something I'm ready to contribute whenever. So next year I can do it again if I think this is, well, they will not allow me at the monastery, but I would do it again because this is really worth it. There is nothing that can substitute this energy that happens not between a group that looks alike, not within Catholics or Christians, but really in the open space, in the open square, with anyone that walks in and that starts seeing as a possibility that we might be able to shape a more just life together. So this is basically.
Thank you very much. The only thing is that maybe it would be better just to speak a little bit slower because of the ladies that translate, but you speak with such enthusiasm that
I'll try. Thank you.
I know it's hard, but just, yes. So thank you very much. But I also wanted to ask Professor Halik about your experience. You were not directly engaged in politics as Sister Teresa, but you are an advisor to President Václav Havel in Czech Republic. So could you just share with us your experience with that?
So, good evening. Thank you for this question. The founder of the Czechoslovak Republic and our first president, Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, was a philosopher. And he met every second Friday evening a circle of scholars, of writers, scientists, academicians, in the house of the writer, Czech writer Karel Čapek, and they discussed many issues. And Václav Havel continued in this tradition. And during his presidency, he met the group of intellectuals every second Friday evening at the presidential castle, the summer residence of the presidents, one castle 40 kilometers from Prague. And we went with a microbus, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And sometimes he sent us some questions or a manuscript of his important speech, which he prepared internationally. And sometimes it was quite open to discuss about the situation in the country, in the politics, so the atmosphere, the attitudes of the people, or what happened in the world. And he was listening. He didn't speak at all. And at 7 o'clock, it came news in TV, and we have a light dinner. And after, he started to put questions. And then we discussed until 4 o'clock. There was a little snaps, and then we went with microbus back to Prague. 11 o'clock we started, from 5 till 11. It was this discussion. It was so about 12, 15 people. Sometimes some of his old friends, as myself, we met during communism. We had something like flying university, the lectures in the private flats. And sometimes some philosophers from abroad, also Jacques Derrida and Charles Taylor, and so came to Prague as a private tourist, giving us the lectures. Sometimes we were interrupted by the secret police, and there were some troubles. But it was for us a great inspiration. So we were not so isolated from the culture of thinking in the world, in the West. And every summer we met in the summer house of Václav Havel in mountains, and we were discussing. And he was always silent, and we were discussing about Paul Ricoeur and many philosophers and sociologists, and he was just listening. And then in his presidential speeches, I recognize some echo of this discussion, because he have a special intuition of an artist to recognize what is the most important idea, and he has his way to express this in the language of a writer. So he brought into politics a new style of language, which was very important. And so some of the people during his presidency were from this old group, but he changed it. Sometimes he invited the lawyers, sometimes the economists, sometimes the journalists, and it was very, 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 very interesting. So it was for him also a little bit university. He hadn't the opportunity to the university. But he was so sensible, and he has this intuition to recognize the most important things. And I think there is also one attempt, one style how to enter the politics. So there are some Christians, they have the special vocation to be professional politicians. Why not? I think the church shouldn't have a marriage with a political party. And then there's also the place for the Christians in the pre-political sphere. The democracy is not just a political system, it's a type of relations between people. And democracy needs also some moral, intellectual, psychological biosphere. And I think it is our task to influence, to enrich this biosphere. So the politics, the political parties and some institutions are like organs in the body, but the organs need blood circulation, and I think this civic society is the blood circulation. And it was the task of Václav Havel. He said the totalitarian system destroyed the civic society because the totalitarian system was able to survive so long because there was some unwritten pact between the rulers and the ruled. If the people will not enter the politics, if the people will be loyal, so everything is possible. There will be some sort of social security, and but if the people would disturb the system, so it was hard. So this secret pact was there so long, but I think in the time of globalization now the free market of ideas and goods, this closed system of this socialist economy and the censorship of ideas was not able to withstand this on this open global market, and they collapsed. The people were not satisfied with what the communist system was offering them, so the loyalty was over. And I think this globalization was perhaps the most important element of the collapse of communism.
They tell me time is running, so we yes. I wanted to ask Professor Šarčević something about one of the topics that is important to us in this summer school is the misuse of faith or the misuse of politics and so on. So I wanted to ask you, when it comes to the political engagement of Christians, where do you see the biggest misuse of faith in political sphere, in political space?
Čuje se. Mislim da ovdje spomenuto, mislim da bismo trebali promijeniti ovo što je rekao profesor Halik, što je Havel radio, što je govorio Bonhoeffer, promijeniti možda sve svoje termine, možda je prejako kazano.
I think what we should have to change what Professor Halik said and what was taught here, and also Bonhoeffer theologian is saying we should, I think, change our own concepts and terms.
Da bismo mogli se možda primaknuti bolje i svojim vlastitim problemima.
So maybe in that way we can approach better our own problems.
Zloupotreba se događa, po mom mišljenju, evo, malo sam i ovih dana iznova pokušao oko toga razmišljati, na razini strahova, recimo.
Misuse is happening, and I was thinking about that these days in the summer school on the level of fears.
Pa recimo strah od izgladnjivanja.
For instance, fear of starvation.
Strah od vladanja, da drugi nad nama ne bi vladali, ajmo mi vladat nad njima.
Fear of ruling over us, and we have a reaction to rule over somebody else.
Ili strah od, to mi je najteže nazvat zato što se radi o nikada do kraja u samom meni identificiranom strahu da totalno nekome pripadam.
And also fear, which is one of the most deep, I would say, fundamental fears for myself, and I have hard time thinking about it, the fear of belonging to somebody.
Ako bismo to prerekli u naš jezik koji mi tako lagano operiramo, radi se o 3 opaka Boga.
And if we will translate that into our religious language, we would say that these fears are 3 fears of, we will translate it as the 3 evil gods.
To su i drugi o tome govorili. Radi se o 3 kušnje. Kapitalizam.
So 3 temptations. Capitalism.
To je povezano s kruhom, s prokletstvom, srebroljublja.
That's connected to the bread, to the curse of the money, and with the passion to have even more, to have security.
Druga, ova što je kod Isusa kušnja, drugi Bog.
Second God, second temptation.
Prvi je recimo korisni Bog. Bog mora biti koristan. Nije koristan.
Gods have to be useful. If God is not useful.
Drugi je jaki Bog.
The second one is a strong God.
To je Bog s kojim ja vladam nad drugima, kojim...
That's a God that I'm ruling over.
Tu je nacionalizam.
Somebody, that's nationalism.
I nije samo nacionalizam, tu je od početnoga bratoubojstva, dakle od početnoga nepodnošenja u obitelji, odakle i počinje najveći problem čovjeka nasilje.
But that's not only nationalism, but also the symbol of the killing of the brother from the beginning of the Genesis. That starts in the family where I have to rule.
Pa do nacionalizma, ili što bi današnji papa govorio o vladanju pojedinih regija nad drugim regijama, odnosno jedna moderna vrsta kolonijalizma.
And you have that nationalism, and also you have that what Pope Francis recently said, that ruling of some regions over other regions, which is a contemporary form of colonialism.
Jel vidite gdje se tu sve koristi, zloupotrebljava religija?
See where these dimensions where religion is misused.
Da se čovjek obogati,
to person to get rich,
Boga samoga.
He's using God.
Da vlada drugima,
to rule over
Božje,
others,
simbole
he's
Božje.
using symbols of God, in the name of God.
I ovo treće, to često, baš je to teško za sve nas.
And the third dimension is hard for everybody.
Imenovao pozitivno.
And I named it positively.
Zato što, kako je to zamamno, kaže, baci se u zagrljaj nekome.
Because it's tempting to throw yourself into the embrace of the other.
Ja ću misliti za tebe.
I will think for you.
Ali vidite kako je to zli Bog koji nam se često nudi da mi s njime eksperimentiramo, da mi kažemo pa ja ću s njim raditi šta god ćeš, pravit ćemo čuda s Bogom. Vidite ove nove duhovne pokrete.
That's evil God that represents itself as a miraculous God. I will do miracles with you.
To je eksperimentiranje s Bogom.
That's experimenting with God.
Bilo na pojedinačnoj, bilo na kolektivnoj razini.
On the individual and the collective level.
Do razine mesijanskog naroda koji spašava sve druge narode.
Up to the level of messianic people that saves other people.
To je sve eksperimentiranje s Bogom.
That's all experimenting with God.
Pokušao sam u ovoj metaforičkoj slici koja se naslanja na evanđelje.
I tried in this metaphorical picture that leans on the gospel.
Kazati gdje su sve moguće
where
zloupotrebe
we
vjere, bilo na
possible
pojedinačnoj,
misusing
bilo
of
na
religion on individual or wider level.
But I would like just one more thing. You speak, and also earlier nationalism was mentioned, and also one question sometimes is, why is nationalism as such a bad thing? Because some people simply understand nationalism as patriotism. So is nationalism that, or is not, and is compatible with faith, or not?
Mislim da nacionalizam u suvremenom poimanju nije kompatibilan
I think
s
that
vjerom.
nationalism in the contemporary understanding is
to je
not compatible
negacija vjere.
with the religion. It's negation of faith.
Gdje god se, recimo, kad god mi pokušavamo spasiti nešto, to ima kod nas onaj poznati ali što mi kažemo.
Whenever we want to save something, we have that but.
Da, to nije u redu. Mislim da je
But
nacionalizam,
this is not good.
teško je njega definirati zato što je to ideologija koja može, samo je možda kapitalizam opasniji.
Nationalism is hard to define because it's ideology that maybe capitalism is evil as nationalism.
Zato što može mutirati, može
Because
biti
it can
kameleonski se
mutate.
ponaša, može imati 100 maski.
It can have 100 masks.
Može imati, zato što ništa nije tako blisko volji Božjoj kao volja naroda, recimo.
Because as they say, nothing is close to the will of God than will of
Ja
people.
ne znam koji to nacionalizam ima, a da ne mrzi neki drugi narod.
I
Zbog
don't
toga,
know whether
da
there is any
najjednostavnije
nationalism
kažem.
that hates other people.
To kad se
put
kaže,
it simple.
ja mislim, to, ajmo to ovako usporediti.
Let's do this
U Evanđelju
comparison.
Isus ustaje protiv svi oni koji viču kako puno vjeruju, kako je to njihova vjera
In
velika.
the Gospels, Jesus is rising up, standing up against those who say
Isus uvijek
that
hvali
they have
malu
big
vjeru.
faith. He always cherishes and saying positively about little faith.
Tako je ovdje.
So
Kogod
here
se
also,
hvali svojim nacionalnim pripadanjem,
whoever is boosting
i
on his
u
national
smislu
belonging,
želi se opravdati pred drugima kako je veći. On
in a
tu
sense
nešto
that he
fali.
wants to justify to
Jer to
others
ne treba,
something is
to je-
missing here because that's
Pogotovo što smo
superfluous.
govorili ovih dana da narod ne može biti iznad osobe.
especially when we're speaking that
Narod
people
je
is
povijesna
not above
konstrukcija.
person.
I
People
konstrukcija.
are historical construction,
A osoba je metafizička vrijednost.
and the person is metaphysical
Naravno
value.
da je narod nije nebitan.
Of course,
Mi
that
smo
people is
povijesna
not
bića. Kršćanstvo
we are historical
kršćanstvo
beings.
ulazi, ono se inkarnira bitno u
Christianity is incarnated
u pojedini narod, u pojedini jezik,
in language,
u pojedine
people,
mitove, naravno,
in
u
myths
pojedinu
also,
zajedničku sudbinu koju
and
dijelimo
also
jedni
common
s drugima.
destiny that we share with
Ali
each other.
je kršćanstvo i crkva je nadnacionalno.
But
Nešto,
Christianity and the church is
ono ga ne negira, ali je
over
nadnacionalno.
national. It's above nationalities. It's not
Mislim,
negating nationality, but it's
Još bi
above
samo
it.
jednu stvar
But just
ovdje,
one thing that
Halik,
Halik
i ja bi još spomenuo, ako ikad
mentioned.
želite naći, imate kod Havela, ja nisam našao nigdje bolje pisano o mržnji.
I haven't found anywhere
Kao kod Václava
better
Havela.
Written about
Jedan
hate
njegov
than in
govor.
Václav Havel. One of
Možda
his
to
speeches.
nastalo isto u njihovom kružoku.
Maybe that was created in their circle.
I zanimljivo je recimo kako govori da ne mrze uvijek ljudi s kompleksom manje
He
vrijednosti.
says that not always people with the complex of less value hate,
Nego ljudi koji se precjenjuju.
but the people who overestimate themselves.
I nacionalna mržnja je lijevak svih pojedinačnih mržnji.
And the national hate is basically a kind of filter for all individual hates.
I još ako mogu ovo, nacionalizam je u biti jedna vrsta fanatičnoga pristupa rješavanja svijeta.
And also nationalism is one kind of fanatical approach to the solving of the world problems.
To nisu ljudi cinici, oni vole svoj narod, stvarno.
They're not cynical people, they really love their people.
Cinici su političari redovito.
Cynical people are
Oni ne vole
politicians.
svoj narod.
They don't love their own
Fanatici
people,
vole
but
svoj narod, ali
fanatics
misle
love their own
nasilno to
people, but
riješiti.
they try to solve problems
Tu
violently
situaciju koja je teška.
or the hard situation.
Naš problem s fanaticima, ili svako od nas ima fanatičnoga,
And our problem with fanatics, and each of us have one part of themselves as fanatical.
meni djeluje uvijek dobro kad god pričate s ljudima koji su fanatični, zagriženi za nešto.
Whenever you speak with
Koji
people who
gore,
are
ono što bi se reklo.
fanatical, that burn around some question,
Mi ne možemo razgovarati s njima kao s osobom. Mi osjećamo
we cannot speak with them
kao
as
da
a person,
govorimo sa kolektivom.
but we have a
Frazama,
feeling
oni
that
sav u
we
frazama. Oni
speak
samo-
with not with persons but with collective.
Ako je
They're
to nije
speaking in
razumljivo,
phrases.
onda to je slično kao s ljudima koji toliko brane crkvu.
That's similar with the people who are defending
stalno
church
viče crkva,
all the
crkva,
time.
crkva.
Church. He's saying they're saying
Vi ne
church, church.
razgovarate sa osobom,
We are
živom
not
osobom,
speaking with a living
nego
person,
s nekim drugim.
but with somebody else.
Nemojte da se iznenadite, to smo mi danas u našoj grupi govorili, Isus bi to kazao, razgovara se s legijom.
Jesus would name that I'm speaking with a legion.
Zato
about
je
that.
nacionalizam teško prihvatljiv kao jedna vrsta modernog opsjednuća od kojeg ne možemo mi jedni druge često osloboditi bez Boga.
So therefore nationalism is a kind of contemporary possession that is hard to deal with. And only God can save us, basically.
So I would ask Sister Teresa if you would agree with this critique of nationalism. Why would I ask you that? Because the movement you joined was anti-capitalist, but also pro-Catalonian independence. So it has this nationalistic, let's say, aspect. So what is your view of nationalism?
Okay, so the Catalans, they have learned to be very careful not to call themselves nationalists, because then it elicits all this understanding, right? And I myself have written a book that's published in Italy called Nation and Compassion. And this book has to try to make the argument that there is, of course, what Ivan was talking about. I know about that. I recognize that. And this, I would say, it's the type of nationalism that historically has been invading other nations in the name of this type of grandeur, right? Or destiny, or you think your people are elected people and then you have a mission to just spread in the world your culture, your language. That started with the Romans already. They thought Roman culture is the culture. Everybody else is barbarian, right? Roman language is the language. Every other is not a language. They are just babbling. And all this, it's very important and to be taken into account. Now, do I think there is a nationalism that's not violent and not chauvinistic? I do. But I think it's a lost battle in today's world, so I don't mind using another word for it. But I do believe that there is something called the love of your own country, the love of your own language, the love of your own culture that is humble and that is based on not the belief that your country, your language and your culture are better than anybody else's, but as I said in the morning, you are thankful to them because they nourish your soul, and especially when they have been under attack. So I think the countries that have been under colonization, they have very good examples of that, and maybe one that comes to mind would be Gandhi, right? Without appealing to this national pride or this national feeling, Gandhi would have never been able to fight against the colonization of the British, right? And certainly Gandhi didn't do that in an imperialistic way, and he didn't do that causing hate in the people. On the contrary, people were ready to give their life for that, right? And there are other movements of freeing the country that are happening even today, and that this is the characteristic they have. They just are defending some against an attack that has been trying to erase a culture, erase a language, and I am very sensitive to that. So I think, yes, there is a place for that, and again, some people in Spain make the distinction, not only in Spain, it's in other political articles today. Some people use patriotism as a positive concept and nationalism as a negative concept. Well, if it has to be, it will be, but I don't like that because patriotism comes from father and nationalism comes from to be born. So naturally, and it has to do with the mother. And so I'm sorry that we just leave the notion of the to be born away to just substitute that for this patriotism that actually do not share these elements of to be born within a culture, to be born within something that nourishes you as a human being. So, and then we have a poet in Catalonia. He's dead now. His name is Salvador Espriu, and I wish I could translate, but maybe it's translated, but I'm not prepared for that. It's a very beautiful poem that says, "Oh, my people, I'm tired of my people because my people are dirty and they are like quarreling and they are all this and that. And I'm told that in the north there are people that are happy and free and intelligent, and how I wish I could go to the north and just leave everything behind. And then people would say, oh, look at him, he's moved away from his community, but I shall never fulfill my dream because I am also quarreling and I am all those things that I see in my people, but I'm going to stay not because of our superiority, but it's because of this sense of belonging. And actually, the sense of belonging is something that Marcel Proust, the writer, in his 4th volume of The Lost Time, that Sodoma and Gomorrah, is where he writes, or Sodoma actually, it's where he writes about the sense of belonging. He paraphrases the Hamlet, that I think today is playing here, or tomorrow, Hamlet, right, in the festival, I think. So Hamlet, everybody knows, right? To be or not to be, that is the question. But Marcel Proust is actually saying to belong or not to belong. That is the question. And Hannah Arendt quotes Marcel Proust, who is quoting Shakespeare, to say to belong or not to belong. That is the question, because if you do not belong to a political community, your rights count for nothing. So that is Hannah Arendt in The Origins of Totalitarianism, that is also pointing to the fact that, and it's what we see today with the refugees, right? You are not part of a political community, so your human rights, your humanness, not only your human rights, your humanness, the fact that you're human, there is nobody defending that, right? Of course, I don't like that, and I think we should link to human beings, not because they belong to a political constituency, but by the very fact that they are human beings. But it's interesting that in history we have had the need, right, of community. And I think Marcel Proust, when he wrote this, he knew what he was talking about because of the fact of being homosexual in a society that he was not open about it. So this sense of belonging, or having to hide who you are because you cannot be recognized for who you are, I think it was also something personal.
I am arriving to final questions, just 2 other questions, because it's already 9:15. So I would ask you, Professor Papanikolaou, one of the topics we have spoken about, nationalism. Another topic that we are dealing with this week is secularization. So that is sometimes an issue with Christians, in the sense that the process of secularization is sometimes seen as something that has destroyed religion. So what is your view of that? How are Christians to deal with secularization?
Thank you. I mean, we've been discussing this topic in the seminars, and I think the problem is that the word secular has, the common meaning of the word secular means that religion has to go away, right? That it's either to be eliminated, or it's to be declined, or it's to be privatized. And I think that this is a very narrow understanding of what secular means. So when people talk about the secular is out to get us, or the danger of the secular, I mean, they have this kind of imaginary group or movement that's somehow out to get religion. and of course there are people like that, and but there's a sense in which they're forgetting sort of the other part of what secular is and what its history and what it made possible, right? And Charles Taylor is very good at this. And the secular space after the 17th century really is the space where religion starts to get positioned differently within society, so as to open up a space of political pluralism. And so the secular is a good thing. So there has to be I mean, it's easy in rhetoric, and it's easy to caricature and to create these words and to just use these words as ways of creating enemies and to demonize others. So in the United States now we're having this big debate over something called critical race theory, and most people who critique critical race theory I don't think have read anything about it. right? They just have this imaginary idea of what it is, and somehow they're critiquing it now. It's become part of sort of the political language, and I think the same thing happens with the word secular, quite honestly, right? It's sort of this word that no one has really studied or understands. It gets used in this way as this kind of something out there is out to get us, right? And it allows people to mobilize, and what they don't realize, though, is that the secular is very Christian, especially if it's a space that opens up a place of pluralism, religious, ethnic, political, and moral pluralism, right? It's something which Christians should actually support. So I just think we need more effort, but politics is not very good at nuance. So we need more effort to be a little bit clear. I would like to say one minor thing very quickly on religious nationalism, if I may. I think one of the things that religious nationalism does, we could go hours about this, but one thing is that it creates a little bit of confusion. And I'm just going to give you a story. I have many stories about this, but I'll just give you one. So when I was, when I was in my much younger days, I was traveling to Greece with my friend. So we're both Greek. We're Greek Orthodox Christians. At the time, we were actually studying in seminary together. We went to visit his uncle in Corinth, sort of a short, sort of tough guy, just coming from the farmlands, sort of. So again, I just want to remind you now, we're with his relative, right? And he turns to us, and he says, in Greek, he says, "Now, John, are you the same religion as we are?" So you're not laughing because you don't get it, right? So in the sense that he's Greek Orthodox in Greece, his nephew from America, who's Greek Orthodox, but he thought we were a different religion because I lived in America and he lived in Greece. So now you understand, right? Right? So my friend's uncle asked his nephew, "Are you the same religion as we are?" Because he lived in the United States. It just creates confusion, right? It really, really does. And it shows also that, at least within the Orthodox setting, this sense of Greek, Serb, Russian, so on and so forth, it shows that they have an idea like, oh yeah, there's something like Orthodoxy that unifies us, but in the end, if you really ask them where they stand their ground, it's in the ethnic identity. And so that's something we have to think about, because when the churches sort of compromise in that way, they are really giving up a lot. So.
And the final question for Professor Halik. Also, I would like you to address this issue of secularization, because it's also one topic that you deal with. And especially when it comes to this idea that secularization destroyed religion, you say that it actually changed religion. So how and what is, in your view, the future of religion, especially the future of Christianity?
Yes,
in this world?
The priests are very talkative and speak too too long and too much. I try to be short. I think we should distinguish between secularity, secular space, secular culture, secularization as a cultural process, and secularism as an ideology. I think there are some biblical sources or roots of secularization in the desacralization of nature and desacralization of the political power already in the Hebrew Bible. We spoke about it in seminar today, that for the pagan pre-biblical Oriental religion, the nature was full of gods and demons. For the biblical understanding, the nature is just creation of God. It's not divine. It's open to the culture and transformation by people. And then also this desacralization of the political power in Orient, in the Old Orient. the pharaohs and the kings were gods or sons of gods. And in the story of Exodus, the Moses said to Pharaoh, "Let my people go." And so the Exodus was sort of civil disobedience. The Pharaoh was not God. And also when the prophet Nathan came to David after he committed his sin, yes, you are just a man. You can't behave like a god. And this desacralization of the divine aura of political power, it is the prophetical task also for the church. If the politics should have aura of something divine, we must say, no, you are just men, are not God. So the desacralization. And the secularization did not destroy religion, but transform it. The traditional religiosity is shattered, but there are very strong, strong form of religion. One is this political ideology. The religion as defense of group identity. It's connected with the nationalism. Nationalism is also national egoism. It's also sort of idolatry. And so this misuse of the political, of the religious symbol and rhetorics by politicians. If your adversary is a Satan or great demon, so there is no chance for some reconciliation. If you project this apocalyptic symbolism into the political scene, so the politics became the apocalyptic battlefield between good and evil, and there is no way to sort of reconciliation. So it is the one transformation into the political ideology, which is very dangerous, because politics is in time of the secularization, the religion lost, and the Christian religion also lost the role of religio in the sense of the integrating power of the society, the common language, and became just one worldview among another worldviews, one sector of the life among another. And there were another phenomenons. They wanted to be religious. They wanted to be the integrational power of the society. It was natural science for a certain time, like a common language of the modern society. Then also the nationalism and then the media. Also the media, especially in the time of the television in the 60s, the TV and the media played some religious role. They interpreted the reality, and they were arbiter of truth and importance. I have seen it in television on my own eyes, so it's true. It was the first topic in the news, so it is important. The media offered the great stories and symbols. it's everything. It's the religious role. It is no more. The media are now also pluralistic, so the people are more in the bubbles of the social media. But perhaps the capitalist market, it's sort of religion of today, to offer, in the bad sense, to offer some, especially offer the informations, which is very important. So one is this political role of religion, and the second is spirituality. This traditional institutional form of religion is weak, but there is a great interest in spirituality. But also there are some dangers, and that the spirituality will be also part of this commercialization and banalization, and there will be the spiritual kitsch, like the esoterics and so on. So we need to put together this spiritual life with the ethics and also with our civic responsibility. So I think it's now the time that religion, perhaps in the word religion was derived from religere, to put together. And I think now is perhaps the chance to have a religion from relegere, to read again, the relecture, to read again the sign of the times, to read again our scriptures, our holy scriptures, to do it in the ecumenical way. I think we are now on the threshold, on the crossroad between the clash of civilizations, it's also the possibility, and the civitas ecumenica. And we should create the civitas ecumenica, the culture of the ecumenical, not just syncretism, but the acknowledging of the identity of the others, and the enrichment. And I think the events like this is a very important sign of this new ecumenism. To put, it's a great thing what happens here, to put together the young theologians from different churches, but also from the different former states of former Yugoslavia. They are always the wounds of the past, and so. And I think it is a great sign of hope that we can come together and to heal these wounds in our national memories and so on. So I'm very grateful that I could be part of this meeting, and I think it's an inspiration for many other nations also. I will try to do something like this in our country also, to put the theologians together and enrich each other. For me, and this is the end of my for me it was a formative experience. When I was 21, I took part in one seminar organized by the British Quakers with the young people from various nations, cultures, races, religions, and we discussed 3 weeks. It was important that we were together also at the evening, and so it was not just a short conference and not the conference online. And then I learned to see the world through the perspective of the others. And then I say, I will devote my life to building the bridges among people. And I think it's so important experience. And thank you very much for organizing it.
Thank you. So I thank our lecturers, and I thank you for your patience, because we have used 1 hour and a half. So please start with your questions.
Yeah, we are sure that Bruna has prepared at least 10 more questions, but we decided to give you opportunity to ask questions yourself. At least, let's say, 4 questions. Please be humble, ask just one question, precise question, and wait for the answer, and let other people also opportunity. Maybe 4 people could ask question, depends how answer is going to be long. And I also want to publicly say thank you for all of you professors coming here in Dubrovnik on this program. I will start not from the woman, I will start from the longest trip. Professor Aristotle, who took on a trip from United States, and also Sister Teresa and Tomasz Halik, who are from Europe, but also it's not easy to organize the time for 1 week being in Dubrovnik, and our friend Ivan Šačević, who actually wasn't traveling at all. It's like the same state. Just kidding. Okay. You can ask questions in Croatian if it's necessary, so Zoran will translate it. Okay, please, questions? First one, okay, sold.
Za Šarčevića, za profesora Šarčevića.
For Professor Šarčević.
Na koji način, ako uopće, je bila zloupotrebljena naša katolička vjera za vrijeme Domovinskog rata?
In which way our Catholic faith was misused during the war here in the Balkans in the 90s?
If it was.
If it was, yeah.
Teško pitanje. Ja mislim da i vi imate dovoljno odgovora za to, ali ja ću reći da bi bio...
It's a hard question, but I think you have enough answers for that, but...
Možda ja jesam malo zaoštrio, pa me je Tereza korigirala.
Maybe I was quite sharp and Teresa corrected me a bit.
Oko pitanja pripadanja.
Around question of belonging.
Ono što se zove Domovinski rat je već upitno za mene.
But we have that term for the war as a homeland war, which is questionable.
Sad ćemo ući unutar etnička razmimoilaženja, zato što ja dolazim iz zemlje za koju se nisu borili za čitav, barem njezin teritorij.
And now we are going to speak about inter-ethnic this misunderstandings, because I'm coming from the country where they didn't fight for the whole country.
Ali kad sam spomenuo Terezu, naravno da nacionalno ima određenog emancipatorskog ondje gdje je ono stvarno ugroženo.
Teresa was saying, and I agree, that national question is an emancipatory question in the countries where the national identities are under threat.
Svaki put je zloupotrebljena religija ili vjera ili kršćanstvo ili naša katolička vjera
our Catholic faith and religion and
u ratu kada se to činilo, kada se ovako bi kazao, ništa nije sekularnije,
nothing is more secular,
najsekularnija i najbezbožnija u tome smislu ideologija je nacionalizam.
Godless theology is nationalism.
A ona je najbliža Bogu zato što koristi simbole, recimo svugdje gdje su po ovoj zemlji posijani križevi,
wherever you have crosses in this country,
bilo gdje,
wherever,
bolje bi bilo da je zastava stavljena ili
hrvatski grb.
To je znak zloupotrebe vjere, da bi se prkosilo drugome, da bi se označio teritorij, da bi kazalo se drugome da ti ne pripadaš, koji nije toga. Otvara se veliko pitanje, malo je,
it's a huge question.
To je, vi znate na to, dakle, nacionalno kao nadahnuće u smislu pripadanja, imati isto porijeklo, isti jezik, dijeliti istu sudbinu, ali tu sudbinu i taj jezik se ne smije nijekati pripadniku istoga naroda zato što zato što nije na moj taj način pripadnik toga,
He's not
te
belonging
nacije.
on to that nation in my way.
To je jako, mislim, jasno je to.
Yeah, it's clear and it's white.
Next one. Don't be too humble. Quiet. Is there any question? Okay, please. No, ask question. Yeah.
Okay, it was just, you've already said it, and you even said it today when we were eating together, but it's so surprising to me that I wonder whether you could expand a little bit on what you just said, that the U.S. evangelicals are now looking towards the Russian as inspiration. This sounded like a shock to me, so.
No, there's actually some very good research about this. So if you just Google American evangelicals, Russian, Putin, and all that, I think you'll find some good information. There's various kinds of phenomenon. One for sure phenomenon that's happening is that American evangelicals are working with various Russians, not necessarily directly with the Russian regime, but various Russians about these traditional values, right? So it's very clear that we have this organization in the United States called the World Organization of the Family, or World Family Organization, something like that. And they, it's very clear that connections have been made, and that even strategies in terms of working within European Courts of Human Rights and UN Councils of Human Rights, that there are strategies, in other words, about how to promote sort of what's called traditional values within sort of the framework of even human rights documents or statements, etc. But even so, even more than that, yes, I mean there are probably a smaller group, but there are groups of American evangelicals who sort of have a little bit of this kind of fantasy-like view of sort of Putin and Russia because the Russian government is making official statements around traditional values. They are. I mean, the foreign minister is, Putin is, the LGBTQ agenda, the godless West, all this. I mean, this is coming from the actual government, from the regime. And so when American evangelicals hear that, they sort of, they like it. That's what they're hoping for in the United States, right? I mean, that's what they want, right? So they're seeing another leader, and they're seeing this leader sort of, being connected with Christians in that country, in an institutional church. So there are definite connections, and even American evangelicals who are sort of in awe and in somehow supportive. But then finally, there are converts to Orthodoxy now, who are more explicitly have this kind of love affair with Russia and Putin, and even say things like, maybe Putin will save us. Right. So yeah, I mean, there's this kind of very interesting thing happening in the United States, and the far right in the United States. Sorry, but the far right in the United States, of all kinds. I mean, both the Christian and otherwise. Yes, they have very favorable views of the kind of the Putin regime, and that's why this kind of thing that's happening within Putin and the elections and all these other things that you hear about. I mean, there is this kind of there is this kind of dynamic, one could say, that perhaps is being exploited as well, because there are this percentage of Americans that seem to have this, that are looking to Russia as some kind of savior, because because of traditional values. So.
Just say, I know it from our country. There's a very sophisticated and very intensive Russian propaganda addressing the conservative Christians and saying that Putin is a new Caesar Constantine and he will lead the Slavic nations against the liberal West, and they are destroying all the values, and the Putin will save us and he will create a new Christian empire and so on. And some Christians are, yes, because it is the same anti-Western propaganda which was by the communists. It was the same what the communists taught us for so many years, that they destroyed West and everything is bad there. So they are repeating this communist propaganda, and it is some subconsciousness of many people in our country, and some Christians are following it. Yeah, so the promised Russia, Putin's Russia is the promised Christian country. So the abortions in Russia are much more than in the West. The alcoholism in Russia is much more. So to speak about this healthy Christian society against this destroyed Western liberal culture, it is lying. But it has some impact, and Russia invests so millions and millions in this propaganda, and the alliance of the former communists with the neo-fascist parties in our country, and they are both supporting the Russia, and they are supported by the Russia, and especially against the European Union. European Union is the devil's state, and NATO and so on, and United States, of course. So this is very strong.
Yeah, just very quickly, just for the students, there's a lot of research, really. I mean, there is, if you Google Russian religious soft power, you'll see some articles come up from the Berkeley Center at Georgetown University, the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. Our center has a thing called Public Orthodoxy, and we just published something from an international human rights lawyer who talks about the changes to the constitution of the Russian government. There's also a European Research Council project called Post-Secular Conflicts, and I can repeat this tomorrow. And the research on that website is all open access. And there are many, many articles about this link with the American evangelicals, about Russia being the moral entrepreneur. And I'll end by simply saying, most of you probably have heard this very famous phrase by someone named Samuel Huntington in the 1990s, who wrote it actually during the Bosnian War, from Harvard. And he said basically that there's a clash of civilizations, and his line divided basically Eastern Europe, the Islamic world, and the West. So I was recently at a seminar with Jose Casanova, and Jose Casanova said, Huntington was right, he just got the line wrong, right? Because the clash of civilization really is over there's social issues, over traditional values. And that cuts across East-West. But the important thing for everybody here to realize is that religion now is being used as the new geopolitical dividing line. So in some sense, religion is back. It never really went away, but it is very, very much forming sort of the geopolitical sort of landscape.
We have two short and precise questions.
The question is for Sister Teresa. You mentioned that you mentioned your ethical criticism of capitalism. So I heard some people who says that capitalism is the most important that that can improve some attitudes or can improve some humans' abilities or innovations or the most stimulate system. So I just want to hear your opinion or some solution, some other system who will be better than capitalism. Thank you.
Short answer, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, first of all, the distinction between capitalism and market, capitalism and enterprise or private enterprise. I'm a Benedictine nun. In our monastery, we have business. We have a ceramics workshop. Some of my sisters, I don't do myself, but they do. They are good artists. They do ceramics, and we have a shop, and we sell. So I have nothing against selling and buying. I have nothing against the market. I have nothing against enterprise, right? I don't want, my ideal state is not centrally controlled state, that the state, everyone is an employee of the state and the state tells you what you can do or what you cannot do, not at all, right? So why am I doing this ethical critique to capitalism? It's like, well, capitalism, as far as I know, is a political system based on the idea that you should strive for the maximum earn, the maximum gain. The maximum gain is something that if you do it on your own, I do it on my own, and each one does it on their own, then we'll end up with the best possible system. That's outrageous. This is insulting to any intelligence, and this is completely contrary to any moral sense, right? If you try to, for example, if my monastery, if we try to gain the maximum, we could be cheating in how we do the things, right? We could be producing some things that are maybe less good quality and selling that for a higher price and speculating with the price, everything that's happening, right? That's corrupting the sense of working and the dignity of what it means to work. This is the first thing in my critique. But there is also, that I said this morning, the sense of the notion that capitalism sometimes is depicted as the one who represents freedom, right? And then socialism or communism would be equality. And some people like more freedom than equality, and some people like more equality than freedom, as if freedom and equality would go against each other, as if we could not imagine a freedom that actually supports equality and an equality that supports freedom, which is my anthropology, and in the morning I tried to explain, right? So I believe the first critique was actually this fallacy of freedom. Capitalism has never been about freedom. My understanding is at the beginning of capitalism, you were having something called national interests, which were the interests of a few capitalists, right? But they were called national interests, and the majority of people were laboring under horrible conditions, children included, right? And they were not having any rights. If they tried to demonstrate, they were crushed by police, because the police was not representing the people and the interests of the people, but the interests of a few capitalists that were powerful and linked to those in the government, right? So I don't think from the beginning the freedom was freedom for all. It was freedom for a few. A few could do what they wanted. If all could do what they wanted, then we would need to think the system differently. So also the notion of freedom as my freedom stops where your freedom starts. I said this morning. I think that's a capitalist notion of freedom, and I think this is a wrong notion of freedom. And I like the one that says, whatever I understand is my freedom is something that will grow when you become more free. It will not be less when you become more free. So that's a way of looking at people, not from competitive eyes, like we are rivals to each other, but with eyes of cooperation. So I think that was part of my critique of capitalism, but there is more. Because nowadays, you say, my example was in 2009, and that's an example that now with these pandemics, it might be sensitive to name, but let me go back to 2009, not to enter polemics about what's going on today in that regard, but some things are parallel. So in 2009, you remember the swine flu, right? It happened then. Margaret Chan was then the general director of the WHO. So maximum person responsible for the health, and you've heard I'm doctorate in public health, right? So this is a field I know how to do research in. So this Margaret Chan general director called the pandemic level 6. So that's the highest alarm that you can call. There were problems then with the scientific evidence for that, but that is not my topic right now. But the point I want to show is, how can the WHO, if you remember then, say that millions of people were going to die from that pandemic, call an international, so a worldwide emergency, and then, if you remember, say, well, maybe we will not have vaccine for everyone because only 4 companies have the patent of the vaccine, right? So they cannot make vaccine for everyone that quick. Listen, why only 4 companies are making the vaccine? All laboratories in all countries should be making the vaccine. Why the economic gains of 4 companies are more worthy of the life of millions that you were saying they were in danger? I couldn't understand this. And I think this is not, it's a very, very, for me, dramatic example that I was involved with directly, but this is what happens all the time. How can we have a world that has 26,000 children dying every day from hunger and just throwing the food as we do in other instances? How can we have an accumulation of capital that it's, what is the numbers? I don't have them in my head right now, but it's 1%, that's something only symbolic, but it's more like this. Georgetown University did a survey many years ago with the American population to ask them, what do you think it would be a good system? Do you think, would you like a system where everyone earns the same, right? And the American population said, no, we don't like that, right? But how much do you think should be the difference? And I'm just going to give you the numbers very quick and symbolically. Okay, let's say they did not want, the American people did not want everyone earning the same, right? They wanted some difference. People work more, people have more value for whatever reason, they are more creative, they should be rewarded with more money. But let's say they thought this would be the right curve, right? I'm just making a bit, not something very exaggerated. America, not other countries, America. Then second question of the Georgetown research. You think this would be the right one. What do you think is happening? And all the Americans said like that, right? So in the general answer of this question is, we think there is more inequality than there should be. But the real find of the real point of this research was, that's what the Americans wanted, that's what they thought it was happening, and the reality is like this. So they didn't have a clue, the Americans didn't have a clue what the real difference it is from earnings from people today. So that this is another ethical problem with capitalism. We have capitalist country and people don't know what's going on. And why, how can that be compatible with democracy, right? That's part of my critique. And another part of my critique is sometimes capitalism is said to be rational system and system that actually adapts better to human needs and human potential and fosters, you have said, right, the human creativity, all these. There is something called programmed obsolescence, right? Do you say that in English like that? Programmed obsolescence. Obsolescence means, okay, I'll explain the concept then. The concept is, you just, have you heard about this bulb, like light bulb in Philadelphia that is burning from 100 years ago? That is something technically that you can do bulbs that do not break. It is possible. You can do stockings that do not break. Why don't we do them? It's like, come on, the business is gone, right? If we do that. How is that our grandparents had things that were stronger than we do? How are we going backwards? How is that they had machines that did not break, like our machines break every so often? It's because something called programmed obsolescence. This is not an imaginary idea. This is how business engineers, they are being asked, develop something that it doesn't break the first day, but it breaks after a year. And so that's how people are investing their intelligence, engineers and otherwise, to just make things that make the greatest profit, because that's just logical, right? If you learn in the business school, you have to make the highest profit. How are you going to make the highest profit if you make such a good product that people will just go on for 20 years and will not come back to buy another one? This is so absurd. Not only it corrupts the scientists, right? You are there trying to do the best. No, You should do the best for the capitalist. You should do the best to earn money, not the best for the best. If you want to do a good chair, do a good chair. Not a chair that is the best according to the gain that the capitalist is going to do. This is corrupting the very science and the very research in medicine. I'm afraid to say, or I'm sad to say, that's happening too. And Nobel Prizes have come out in the media and explained this, right? How research is putting in a drawer. And I myself published something called The Crimes of the Pharmaceutical Companies after doing research and discovering this. Pharmaceutical companies putting on the drawer, promising research because it was going to be damaging for the business, right? And just promoting other medicines that can make the people go on being sick but not dying from the disease. This is horrible. This is the worst ethical. If I don't criticize that ethically, I don't know what to do. And these are not examples that are hidden. Those are actually the beginning of my published critique of pharmaceutical companies says all pharmaceutical companies in the United States between the years 2000 and 2003 have been accused in the penal courts, so not have been accused in the tribunals in the courts in the United States and found guilty of crimes. And what is this? The companies don't go out and start shooting the people, no, but they put out in the market products that they know are going to kill people. And an example is Vioxx. That's, maybe you had it here, I don't know with that name. It's an anti-inflammatory. Rofecoxib is the name there. So that's one thing, and then there is more things. There is something called, and then programmed obsolescence. It means, for example, I don't know whether you have experienced that with your printer. It's a very good example, right? You have a printer works perfectly, and suddenly it doesn't work anymore. You bring it to the shop and they say, oh, you know, it will cost you more money to repair than to buy a new one. Okay, you buy a new one, but what are you going to do with this plastic thing? You just throw it in Africa, right, most of the time. You just pile and pile millions and tons of garbage that is an acute ecological problem. Is that a rational system? Is that a system that makes sense? That you just, for example, so all these companies, Apple, and you buy a computer and then they have a kind of, how do you call this? Connector, right? And then you have another connector and you cannot use the connector, so you have to buy another. It's wonderful for the business, it's a disaster for the planet. What are you going to do with these million plastics? If you want to improve your computer, do that with a very small microchip. You put it there. Don't make me buy the whole thing again, the whole plastic thing, because millions and millions and millions piling up garbage, that is a problem. And it's not count. This is not count when the capitalist makes the balance at the end of the year. The ecological problems, some countries try to make them accountable, but that's absolutely not taken into account how it's damaging all of us and the planet, right? But more things, it's when you have, for example, something called, in English, let me think 1 second, it's the cost of opportunity, right? What is cost of opportunity? These people learn in the business school. Cost of opportunity is, let's say, a capitalist has a factory in my country, in Catalonia, right? And there is somebody who is the administrator of that, and this person is being asked by the shareholders to just produce the maximum benefit. That's why that's so damaging. Okay, that person learns that if I move my factory to Vietnam, I'm going to, of course, have a lot of costs because I need to move it to Vietnam, but then I make the numbers, and at the end of the day, because Vietnam I can pay nothing for the job, and because I don't have to pay ecological taxes or any of that, because we just ruined the whole country and nobody cares, so I'm going to move my factory to Vietnam. And that Vietnam will start lowering the conditions of the workers to attract these factories, and this is another disaster. But this is happening every day in our world. It's a crazy system. How we live. Capitalism has nothing to do with me not liking enterprise and entrepreneurs. I like that. But all these things I've told you, and the last one is, I was in 2004 in Rome. But there was then the Congress of the Benedictine Abbots, and I was there not because I was then a Benedictine abbot, but because I was translator for them, right? So I was translating from, I don't know, German or English into Spanish, And here comes the friend of the abbot general, who then was Notker Wolf. Now it's another one, a German. And Notker Wolf, very well-known German, he was inviting his friend of childhood. And his friend of childhood was somebody who had been a directive of Deutsche Bank. So invites the person, here is 400 abbots, the person starts giving a talk about ethics of capitalism. And I'm translating, right, in the translation booth. So then person says, some people think we capitalists are not ethical people. And I'm translating, okay, blah, blah, blah. Because they say, we go to the third world country and we just pay €1 to the people there and we get 1,000 euro from them, right? And they think this is not ethical and should not be done. But he said, that's wrong. That's wrong to call this unethical. The right question is to ask, how much was this person earning before I came, before I, capitalist, came? If the person was earning 10, and because of what I did, now it's down to 1, that's not ethical. But if the person was dying from hunger and was earning nothing, and now it's earning €1, that's ethical. And I couldn't stop translating and saying, this is crazy. What this person is saying, it makes no sense, so they didn't invite me anymore to be a translator for the abbots. But I couldn't, my stomach just went, it turned, right? Truly, so that's what I...
Last question. We have it before. Okay. Short, precise.
Thank you for your thoughts and ideas. I'll be shorter than Sister Teresa. So my question is, basically, you're all talking about politics and criticizing especially capitalism, nationalism, and especially religious nationalism. So that's basically something negative, right? So the criticism, and the positive thing that you have emphasized is pluralism, and the means of getting to pluralism, achieving and upholding pluralism is love, right? And compassion and dialogue. But I think that love is only a half of the story, that truth is the other half. And I know it's a little bit tricky to talk about truth because we talk about objective truth, right? And I think that we don't talk about it only from a religious perspective, but we also say that there's a natural law. So there's objective truth inscribed in the natural law, right? And when we discuss these ideas with other groups in our pluralistic area, we don't need to use any more religious symbols or thoughts and ideas. So what's my question now, and I can direct this at Professor Papanikolaou, because he was talking about also traditional values that religious nationalism takes and uses in a bad way. So my question is, what are our roots and what are our base points from which we start that are ours, which we cannot compromise and which we cannot lose, and then how to dialogue with others who have, from our viewpoint, really something that's not objectively good. Thank you.
No, it's a good question. Look, I think I talked about this again today in a seminar, and I think the challenge for the Christian is that they have to recognize that the ecclesial or the church community is not the political community. There are two different communities, right? And you talk about natural law, and this is a debatable concept, but to some extent, something like a natural law concept can apply in the sense that the end of the political community is not the end of the ecclesial community, even though the ends are analogous in the sense that we want to see patterns of relationships within political communities that ideally we see, we expect, we hope, in ecclesial communities. But the challenge for the Christian is that in the political community, you have a choice. You can either basically say, I have the truth, and I'm going to impose the truth in the ecclesial community, of course, but on the political community. and I'm going to expect the governments and politics to impose this truth. And of course, that entails using force and violence and other things to make sure that the truth is imposed. So that one maybe can call that a politics of truth. Violent truth. Or you can recognize that in the political community you have to deal with people who don't believe what you believe. And if in fact you're committed to something like democratic liberalism, you are in the end committed to equality and freedom for everyone in that particular community. And it's not true that political liberalism means that there's no morality. There is morality. There's equality and freedom. And how those things get understood is an ongoing tradition and process of thinking about how those words and concepts somehow apply in various situations with various questions that emerge. So for example, the example I used today in class was equality and freedom, but at one time in the United States, Western Europe, women didn't have the right to vote. So there was a debate and discussion and discernment, and there was a lot of arguments against it, a lot of religious arguments against it. But now it's unthinkable. Maybe a small percentage of people still think women shouldn't vote, but it's really unthinkable that we would ever go back on thinking that somehow equality and freedom doesn't entail women's right to vote, right? So the problem for the Christian is that in your ecclesial community, you don't quite know, you know that certain things maybe within your ecclesial community, certain moralities are structured in such a way that you know that within this community, which ultimately you're a part of in order to experience God, you don't quite know when you make the shift to the political community how then to speak to that community in relationship to various issues. So for example, okay, so thou shalt not kill. That's within the ecclesial community, and you can say to yourself, okay, well, yeah, that should also be in the political community, right? Equality and freedom means that you can't just kill anybody indiscriminately. But when it comes to, let's say, something like gay marriage, some Christian communities say, and even within Christianity this is debated, but let's just say, in some Christian communities they say, okay, well, we have Bible, canons, fathers, magisterium, it's settled. So again, I realize that that's even debatable, but let's say they say it's settled. Then the question comes is when you shift to the political community, then you have to discern, is that something that I should now really try to prevent within the political community? Am I contributing to freedom and equality? Or am I, which is what you're implying, saying to myself, this is a universal truth. If I don't fight for it here, I'm somehow betraying my faith. But I don't think you are betraying your faith, because your faith tells you that you have to deal with people that don't believe what you believe. So your faith could actually be dictating that when you're in the political community, you have to discern, as you mentioned today, at transverse, you have to discern what is it that I need to fight for in this truth of the political community so that people can live together and be equal and free, even if there are laws that promote things which I don't agree with. And throughout history, the church has never one-to-one paired its canon law to legal laws. Never. So thou shalt not kill, yeah, of course, yeah, that's something we should put here, right? Fasting on Fridays, no, we shouldn't make that a law of the land. That doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to impose fasting on the person who's not a Christian. So there's a sense in which, from the ecclesial to the political, we have to make a shift. And at that point, it requires discernment. And it requires discernment on how to live in a political community with people that don't agree with what you believe in. And yes, there's universal truth, but maybe there's a universal truth about how political communities should be organized. And maybe that universal truth means that we have to exist with laws that we simply don't agree with and somehow don't match what's going on in our ecclesial community. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Okay, so, yes, please.
Because of, on that point, there is this, well, briefly, huh? But
Short.
because, as far as I understand, who is called the father of political liberalism would be John Locke, and the letter of tolerance in the 17th century. And I think it's very important to recall that in that letter, it's not that John Locke writes, all religions are equal, and that is why the state should not enforce any religion. What John Locke writes is, the state should avoid people doing violence on other people, for whatever reason, also, of course, including religious reason. The state should also avoid people within a religious community being abused if it's known, and that is a protection of the citizen. But as to whether the state can espouse a religion is not what Locke writes, and I think is interesting. It should not, because all religions are equal, but it should not because the state doesn't know which one is the right one. I like that, because that allows for truth of this kind. It's not relativism the only thing that can found this respect of which Aristotle was talking about. It's not that if you want to deal with the other person in respectful and equal terms, you have to assume that maybe Buddhism is as good as Christianism. And if you have your faith, nothing deprives you from holding it as universal truth, but you have to acknowledge that the state doesn't have to make a decision on which one is the right religion, even if you believe that there are such a thing as right and wrong, even right and wrong religion or even right and wrong beliefs. I think this is an important point because it contributes to have a pluralistic society authentically. So participate on that society without having to espouse this view. And also because sometimes what we have been calling the secular society, in Spain we distinguish between secular and laicite or laicist society, and this is also something that exists that would be representing this, what you said, more aggressive type, right? So it's assuming not only that all religions are equal, but none of them is good for nothing, right? That exists too. So.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all our lecturers and all these interesting topics that you have shared with us. Thank also to you all and for your patience and all the time that you have given us, and thank you. So have a good evening and have a good night, and I hope to see you next year.